something.
The journey.
My daughter teaches at Georgia State, and she also taught at Lee. And so she says her problem at Lee is getting kids to settle down and stop talking. And her problem at Georgia State is getting anybody to ever say anything. So I think they get it from you. So I invited Kevin to come and give this presentation because I think a lot of people are kind of disillusioned with exams, and you give one and you think it's so good, and then you look at it and you think, oh my gosh, you realize you didn't form it very well, or they didn't understand what you said, or whatever. And how is this testing what you were trying to do in that class? So Kevin has experimented with other ways of testing, some projects and that sort of thing, to assess student learning without actually giving a test. And so I've asked him to come and share some of those things.
All right. So yeah, since I gave up hope, I feel a lot better. So let me tell you what I'm going to do today and what I'm not going to do today. One, I haven't given an exam in 1.5 years now. This semester will make 2 years, and I do feel a lot better. I'm not going to try to convince you to give up exams. There are lots of good reasons to give exams. We'll talk about maybe why some of those are and what are better ways to give even exams. But what I do want to do is give you about 50 other ideas that you might do in your classes. So I'm going to go really quickly through a lot of these. We don't have time to talk about a lot of them. But when they do a little videoing back here, they record me and they put the PowerPoint in there. So all the information's up on the PowerPoint. So if you want to go and listen to me again, hit mute. So you just play it, or just email me and I'll email you the PowerPoint. And it's lots of things. And this is what Carolyn was talking about Facebook yesterday, outing my secrets. I just ask students all the time for ideas, and they give me ideas. So about 80% of the ideas in here actually come from you, from our students, because I asked them this question that I'm about to ask you. So here's the first question. It's actually a statement, but just go with it. So think of an assignment, quiz, exam, paper, project, presentation, anything from when you were in college where you felt like you truly learned about the subject of that class. So we're going to do this for a minute, so just think for a second. A few years back for some of you. A few years back for more of us.
Too far.
Too far. I took a class in college, that's what I remember. Think you got one? Usually this comes fairly quickly because most of us were decent at school, and so it comes up. Let's do about 3 of these. Somebody share one. Tell me about an assignment when you were in class and you felt like you really learned the subject. Yeah.
It's when I was learning something related to learning a piece of music. I learned it best when I video recorded my professor playing some teacher modeling, and then I can go back and really analyze and just go back and then actually execute better.
Okay, so you actually had a visual that you could see and imitate. Imitation. Good. There's one. Somebody give us another one.
The comprehensive take-home exam.
Oh, a comprehensive take-home exam. So, like at the end of the semester?
Yeah, so they put everything together.
Everything together. Okay, good. I was hoping somebody would mention an exam. Otherwise, it looks like I'm stacking the deck in here.
It was an exam, but it was different. It was a 1-question final exam for my Anatomy 2 class in undergrad.
Okay.
And the question was, man steps off sidewalk, almost gets hit by a bus, jumps back quickly. Explain everything physiologically that occurred in that moment. And you had to, you had to write for 5 or 6 pages of everything that occurred and integrate all the anatomy that you would learn throughout the entire year.
Okay. Let's do one more that's not an exam. Yeah.
Well, Alex said that I can do a paper every week.
Oh, a paper every week. How long?
Pretty long. It's pages. That is the key point thing was that forced you to get into the primary literature.
Okay. Absolutely. So getting to the primary literature. So, just out of curiosity, how many of you thought of exams first? About a handful of you. How many of you thought of paper? Yeah, the English folks, of course, raised their hands. Let me see. Anybody think of quizzes? Yeah, when I did this on Facebook, a student actually commented on quizzes I used to give in class. And I thought, really? That's what you're taking away? That's fine. So, projects, how many people thought of projects? Yeah, lots of projects. Presentations? Yep, if you have to teach something, you learn it fairly well. So, I did ask this to current and former students, and I have 3 slides worth of their responses. I finally had to shut it down after about 18 hours because they kept giving me so many things. So these are students you may have taught, or your predecessors here at Lee taught somebody around here. So I've highlighted a few. Let's go really quickly. This is why I don't do PowerPoints, by the way, and this is the extent of my PowerPoint ability. So here's what students said. The red ones are the ones I'll talk about. You can read the others at your leisure. One was a book review in a theology class, and she said it helped her better understand academic writing in that field. So one question to think about when you think about your classes is, what are the types of things our discipline values? Is it primary research? Is it writing book reviews? What do they do? What should they be able to do by the time they get through with our majors? Well, that's a great question to ask. One, I love this one. She did a Spanish presentation and research project on a controversial issue in a Spanish-speaking country, meaning controversial issue in that country. So she had to research the culture of the country, the issue, and practice speaking in the language. I love this. She had to learn 3 different things all in one project, because one of our main concerns when we think about covering material is time. Well, this covers 3 things in the same amount of time as just doing a typical project. Great, I love that one. And this was one of the last ones to come in. A project helping Cleveland estimate cost savings of changing traffic light bulbs to LEDs. It made the, I think it's felt like a real application of skills. You know, it's not just math or science in a vacuum. Pushed the knowledge and gave a sense of accomplishment. Almost every student commented on this, that they felt like they were pushed in some way, but they felt this real sense of accomplishment at the end, because that's a hard project for many of our students. It's a hard project for me. So, here's some more. Project using the Cleveland Historical Archives to write about a local history topic of her choosing. Side note, of their choosing was probably the #1 phrase I saw. Students love open-endedness where they got to pursue something they really care deeply about. It's funny because they say they want structure, and they do, but they also want some sort of freedom. So I saw that phrase come up over and over and over again. This made her feel like an historian. This was in a capstone class, and feel comfortable presenting this paper since she knew it so well. She took this to a conference. And so since she was the one doing the primary research, I mean, if she presents this even at Chattanooga, they don't know Cleveland history as well as she did. She felt like an expert on the subject. It's great. And one of my favorites, teach an hour lesson. The student had to teach an entire hour in a summer school class. It was 2 hours. They taught the first half, the professor did the second half. She had to design a quiz, and it was a little confusing, but in some way their teaching grade was tied to the student's performance on the quiz. So like in some way they were evaluated on how well the students did, which I find a little pedagogically problematic, but it's interesting. So including a quiz, the main thing that it made her realize that was the importance of passion in presenting the material. And she now has to do presentations in the business community, and so to sell her materials, she has to bring that same kind of passion that we often do. So I liked that. Couple more. Physics exam, I say I put an exam, I'm not going to stack the deck, returned to the next class period, and students could then correct mistakes for half credit. This is somebody who's now teaching physics in high school, by the way. He was going to go to med school, some things changed, etc. So some students learned more from the corrections than actually studying for the exam. Because, you know, sometimes our students don't pay attention until their grade's on the line. Maybe 1 or 2. Debate over the subject matter, but students didn't know which side they would defend until they walked into class that day. So they had to prepare both sides, and they had to know each side equally well. And then it was just kind of like drawing something out of a hat, and you're pro and you're con. That was in a history class. This was in, I think, a psych class. Every student proposed a research topic, including methods, hypothesis, etc., to the class. The class votes on the top 8. And then they're divided up into 8 different groups. Each class member works in one of those groups, and they later presented their findings at a symposium. Taught her the material, but also the importance of doing the research in that field. I know there are other classes around here that do that. I'm thinking of Matt's like directing class where everybody has to come and present their pitch for a script and the class votes on which script gets made. So it's not just the production that's doing it, it's how do you convince people that this is a worthwhile project. So all throughout the process works well. So, okay. Well, what about the research? Okay, I'm just going to be honest here. This started as I'm going to write a blog post for the CTE, and Karen's like, well, why don't you do a presentation on this? I did no research before I decided to give up exams. I'll tell you why I gave up exams in a minute. So I went and looked at some research. What are the results of the research? It's mixed, to say the least. Are exams useful or not? Well, it depends on the study. Here's the one thing I can tell you, though. Every bit of research these days is saying, if you get to exams and they're not cumulative, they're not effective. Because students cram for them, they regurgitate the material, and then they forget about it. So the idea of a cumulative big exam at the end, this is exactly what we should be doing. Knowledge should build. And there are lots of ways to do this outside of exams, but I think I never gave cumulative exams. I'll just be honest. For 14 years here, I never gave one. And now I'm thinking, oh, I feel really bad about this. So that's the one thing I learned about this from the research. Maybe more than one thing. That's it. So why did I stop giving exams? One, they felt like wasted days. We all struggle with time. That's 3 days gone. And if you take the final exam period, it's 4 days worth of material I can cover. So if I want to cover more material, if I want to have more discussions, there's 4 more hours on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class. And I do use the final exam slot to cover material or to have them do presentations in some way. So, and also, I was that student when I was given an exam in college. I could read the exam and I could tell you my grade without writing a word because I knew what I knew and what I did. So I felt like exams were wasted when I was a student. I wanted just to read the exam and just write 86 on the top and give it back to the professor and see if they'd take it. They wouldn't. So that was one. I've never been satisfied. I started here giving all essay exams, and I figured out fairly quickly there were students who were not reading, who were going online and reading Cliff's Notes, and they weren't making A's, but they could pass, so they could make C's. And I'm like, you're making C's and not reading any of the material in US Lit 1. This is a problem. So I moved to the exam format that my grad professors used, and I'm like, well, this will make it better. There's some objective part on here. Nobody will be able to outsmart this. Of course they're able to outsmart it. Some students can outsmart any exam format we come up with. Which leads to a story. Who beat the system? I prided myself on my exams. Like, students did well in them, but I thought, well, it's because I covered the material well, they're reading, they're doing the work. So I had a student confess to me post-graduation. I used to brag that you could not make an A on my exams if you did not do the reading. In a 400-level literature class, she did not read for half the semester and made an A on the exam. And she told me this after graduation. With great glee, I might add. She never needed a letter of recommendation, and it's a good thing. I'm still a little bitter about this. So I just started getting mad. Like, we start to think of ourselves as policemen at this point, police officers. And so I didn't like that. But I thought, okay, still, I can tweak this, I can do better. And then I had a story from a student who I say point blank, we professors failed, and especially, I taught her as well. So this was a student who was an education major, and she was taking the praxis. And she was now taking it for her 3rd time. She failed it twice before. Because she was not a strong student. I'm not surprised she might have failed it once, twice, even 3 times. So she comes to my office because a few years ago I had this crazy idea that I was going to take all the standardized tests that our students take. Because they came to me to ask about the GRE. Well, I can tell them about the GRE from the mid-90s. They talk about the major field test. I don't know what's on our major field test. The praxis, close to half of our majors these days are ed majors, and I'd never taken the praxis. What's on it? If we say that they have to pass this to get their certification, we should know what's on it. So I'd done that, so students who struggle with these tests often find me at some point. So she's struggling, she comes to talk to me. Really, I told her about how to take tests and she passed it. I feel a little bad about that, by the way. But here was the comment that made me rethink everything. She was talking about how she struggled, she talked to somebody else about how to study, and she said, all my life, I've gotten by on flashcards, and flashcards don't work anymore. And I thought, you should have never gotten through life on flashcards. Like, we don't want students walking out our door, I don't think, who get by life on flashcards. Well, students had gotten through my classes for years on flashcards. That's how they passed my exams. They might take a hit on the paper, but they could pass. So I thought, well, I don't really want to measure life on flashcards anymore. So I have no good research to give up exams. I just have that story. And I hate that. By the way, we're really bad about that. We just tell anecdotal stories and make all kinds of decisions. And I just did that. But that's okay, because I'm all right with it. So, here's where things really pick up. What can we do instead of exams? There are 5 different things I think we could do. So, writing is always good. By the way, I'm trying really hard not to keep this to turning into just like an English lesson, like just go assign more papers, that'll solve everything. No, it won't. It'll solve a lot, but not everything. So, short essays, longer papers, even essay portions on exams, should you use them? Even in calculus. I'm sprinkling some of my experiences out in here. My freshman year, I was an English major. I'm an English major now. I was a math major. I started school as a math major. I was going to be a math teacher, and I took Calc 1. And on my final exam in calculus, I had to write an essay. Well, it was a very short essay, but it was, how would you solve this problem? And I had to explain how I would solve the problem. I'd never seen this before. You can actually assign writing in math classes? It's too bad Laura Singletary's not here. I think it's in her history of mathematics class. They have a 20-page research paper. Right, writing, it's a good thing. So we're going to talk about each of these. Laboratory learning, yes, it's mainly sciences and social sciences, but there may be some ways you can tweak that in other interesting classes. Experiential learning, hi, welcome to Lee. Peer learning, them teaching classes, or the big talk these days is what's called PBLs, problem-based learning. My wife is a high school librarian. They're all about PBLs these days. So we'll talk about some PBLs. So what I'm going to do is go through really quickly. I'll give a couple of brief comments about each of these, writing lab, experiential, peer, problem-based, and then I'll give you a bunch of examples. And I tried to pull from a bunch of different disciplines, and this is where I swiped from our students left and right, but also 3 books I'll give you at the end. So, and some of the things my teachers did. So, writing assignments. They can range from short, note, ungraded, or loosely graded. Whenever we talk about making students do more writing, the first thing we think is, I have to grade that. Well, yeah, more or less, but you can grade these really quickly. I do Moodle posts in my upper division English classes, so they have to write 150 to 250 words. It's not very distinctly graded. It's, just a 1 through 5 scale. Essentially, if they're writing something interesting on the subject, they get a 5. But they have to write and they have to think before they come to class. Then, this goes back to my August presentation, I use it to call on them, by the way. So I'll say, since I'm looking at Chad, Chad, you said such and such. Talk about that. So that student who says really good things in writing and never speaks in your class, they will speak in my class because I'll make them. And I'll never do it to embarrass them. It's always when they've done something well, so they know that. Or you can, of course, do longer traditional papers. Most people I know do a good mix. Here's a 1-page assignment on this, here's an article summary, here's a book review, here's the big paper, mix it up into the writing different types of writing. I even in my Western Lit class have them write a poem. And so they have to write a love poem, by the way, because we read love poetry and then they have to write love poetry. But they also have to write a paper talking about what we read and how it influenced their poem. So they have to analyze the type of poetry we read, but they also get to write something creative. Inevitably, this is their favorite day. And we get really fun poems about odes to coffee and such things. And I also write a poem myself. We share them anonymously, and they read them, and they have to try to guess which one's mine. So they're almost never right. I'm not sure what that says. And of course, shorter writing assignments, prompt discussion. So here's some writing examples. An advice column for Dr. Science. Quick side note, advice columns are wonderful to have students write. When I was in high school, I worked at Kroger. That's how I worked myself through high school and college. And I wrote the advice column for the Kroger newsletter called Dear Barney. Barney Kroger started the grocery store. And so it's things like, Dear Barney, why don't people return the frozen items that are unbought to the freezer? And so I would just make up these elaborate answers that were humorous and then provide solutions. And that helped me start writing. So, advice columns, always great fun. So Dr. Science gets this question. A young man and woman are having an argument over a pop fly. The young man's girlfriend says when it reaches its peak, it has a velocity of 0, but an acceleration not equal to 0. And Dr. Science needs to solve this relationship problem. So of course you can see where they have to understand the physics to answer this question, and they get to write it as an advice column. So it's great fun. A 1 to 2 page paper explaining any aspects of classic conditioning in a scene where a man opens a new can of cat food and his cats run into the kitchen and rub against his legs. This is that idea essentially of that physiological thing, like here's a scene, describe it in our discipline. Describe what's going on mathematically, psychologically, sociologically, anything like that. A paragraph explaining how to solve a math problem, my calculus class. There's the Moodle post, which I always mention. And the last one, that book review or summary of an academic article. Essentially, what are the main types of writing in your discipline? I mean, if we're trying to train them in our discipline, what are they going to have to do? So for English people, that's a lot of analytical papers. But it also may be book reviews, article summaries, proposals, any kind of writing like that. So there's a bunch of writing examples. Lab learning, science and social sciences. Here's where the research does give a suggestion, though. To be most effective, labs have to really be open-ended. You probably had a high school science class at some point where all you did was reenact a lab. If you do this and you do that, then X will happen. And you do it and you do it and you say, oh, good, I learned something. And you learned how to measure things, I suppose, and that's what you did. And that's what I learned in high school biology. So open-ended labs are much better. So, okay, this one's kind of cheating. It's also experiential. Have students go blind or mute for a period of time. I'm using both of those because I did that when I was in college. I had a psychology class. He was talking about disabilities and how people function. And so he had us blind ourselves. We had to take cotton balls and tape them down. One person guided you who was sighted, and then you were blinded, and you walked around campus for about 45 minutes or an hour. And I will say, that my senses started to change, even in just that short amount of time. Like we were walking down a hill, and I turned to my guide, and I said, I think that's so-and-so behind us. And she turned and looked, she said, there is nobody behind us. And a few minutes went by, and they crested the hill. So I could hear them well before she could. It also just changed your perspective of things like straight. Because when you're the guide, you're like, walk straight. No, straight. No, straight. Because, of course, straight becomes very complicated if you can't see. So that was the blind, and mute was for linguistics class, and she told us to try to go 24 hours without speaking. I lasted, I think, 30 minutes because, well, I didn't want to do it, number one, but number two, I talk a lot. So, coding, write a code for a program that will enable students to determine what they need to make on the final exam to make a certain grade. I thought there should be an app for this, and so I don't have a cell phone, and my wife does, and so I said, look up and see if there's an app for this. There are lots of apps out there that do this. So the next time your students say, what do I need to make on the final, just say, there's an app for that, and they can go find it. There are also websites, by the way. So there you go. Field work, anytime you can get them out there. So here was one I did in the same psychology class for extra credit. We went to a grocery store where I worked, and we would ask them how much screen time they allow their children. At the time, it was just television, of course. And then another of us would kind of stalk them around the store, and we would measure how often they asked for products. So essentially, we're trying to make some argument about if they watch more TV, they actually ask for more products, which was found to be true. Now, this is in no way a controlled study, but it's fun for a beginning psychology class. Like, it got me interested in the subject, and it made me think about how we measure things. So it was fascinating. Monitoring one another. We did this in my high school physics class. We had to run up the stairs and then measure force by that. We would time each other, and so whatever the force equation is, I don't remember it at all. Here's what I remember, by the way. Mr. Salyer, my high school physics teacher, slid down the banister of the stairs, hit the gym floor, and his shoes were slippery, so his feet went right out from under him, and he just bit it. That's what I remember. Side note, somebody also in our physics class brought him a solar-powered cigarette lighter because we had studied concave and convex mirrors and the reflection thereof. And so that's essentially what it was. It was just a big mirror with the right point where you'd put the cigarette and you would point it at the sun. And you would angle the sun's rays. So he took us outside and started lighting a cigarette and smoked it because it was the 80s and you could do that. But it was that idea of like, this is real world application in a really odd sort of way. But like, if you didn't understand how this worked, you couldn't design this. It was great. And case studies can work well here too, and we'll talk about case studies in a minute. Experiential learning, this is Lee's core values. Service focused, any kind of service is going to be, experiential learning if you're out there doing something. Any kind of field experience helps. Here's what the research says. Both people have to know what the goal is. Several years ago, a student came and asked if I would help with a video they were making for a class. And I said, why are you making this video? And they said, I have no idea. Well, that's experiential learning, but it doesn't do anything if they don't know what it's doing. So we have to know why we're doing it, because sometimes we just like doing things. Like you get that idea, and you're like, this is going to be great, and then you do it, and you're like, I have no idea why we did that. Like going blind. I used to have my freshman comp students do it. Why? Because it was fun. And the great thing about teaching writing, as long as you have them write about it, it's assignment. So we have to know what it is, and they have to know what it is. So, different background, anytime you can interview someone, and cross-cultural experience. I mean, we all do this, but we can do this on campus. I tell students all the time, you can go hang out with people who are different than you, and you can then use that in your writing. So, do that. Visiting a place of worship different from students' own. I'll talk about that in a minute. Having visitor speakers. Working with various classmates to produce a film, video about a subject. These days, my wife's finishing up her library science degree, and she had to do things like a screencast, a podcast. I mean, technology has become so easy and accessible to our students, they can make movies without batting an eye. Not like real movies, like YouTube movies. I've had to help with their real movies. They can't make those without batting an eye. Any service learning. This is what I used to do in my freshman composition class. Students would perform a variety of experiments on themselves. If you've seen the movie Super Size Me, where he decides to eat McDonald's every day, every meal for 30 days. Spoiler alert, it doesn't go well, just in case you were wondering about that. So there are lots of books that do this, and I would make them read various sections, and then they would have to take something on or give something up for 4 weeks. So somebody may become vegetarian or vegan. Somebody, they've explored other denominations or other faiths. The problem with this, there were two problems. One, a lot of the students just couldn't analyze it well enough to write good papers. So I'm like, I've asked them to do more than they're capable of doing at this point. And the second is students started to get close to hurting themselves because they wanted to do something different. So they're like, oh, vegetarian, that's nothing. I'm going to do the Yes Man Challenge where I say yes to everything for 30 days. And they end up on an island somewhere in, with no phone, no car, and they almost got into a fight. And it's 3 a.m. in the morning. And I'm like, okay, this is probably not safe any longer. I also had a student take up running, and he passed out in downtown Cleveland. So before I got in real trouble, I decided to shut this down. But it led to some really great papers, by the way. There was one student who tried to give up apologizing for 30 days. And you would think that would be really easy, but it was really difficult for her. And she started figuring out that women apologize more than men. And so she did this really interesting gender study in her paper. It was great. I love papers like that. There was another guy who tried to give up complaining for 4 weeks. And it led him to just really talk about how we appreciate things and how we don't, and how often we complain, by the way. And his presentation was wonderful because he started by saying, I failed every day. And he talked about what he learned from his failures. So there were lots of fun projects from that. Okay, there's another one I just have to tell about. This one guy decided to watch horror movies every day for 4 weeks. And that doesn't sound too bad, unless you're like me and just are terrified of horror movies. But it really honestly got so bad, like he would come into class without having slept. And he just had these big black circles under his eyes. It was atrocious. And so that was the last semester I did. I mean, he was suffering. And I decided the next semester, and he was still suffering the ill effects of this. So I'm like, this has got to go. So, great idea, but within reason. Okay, the breaking the social taboos, though, I used to do that as like a small assignment, and that was fun. because my same psychology professor, who I learned a lot from if you can't tell, he told a story, and I don't know if it's true or not, but when somebody would break a social taboo, they went into a restaurant and they sat down at a table that had not yet been bussed and started eating the leftover food off of it, which I'm an anti-germphobe and I do things like that in my classes. So I love this. So I had students do this, and one went to the mall, talking about almost getting in a fight, and they tried to borrow somebody's cell phone. They said, my cell phone has died. I need to call my girlfriend to have her come and pick me up. Can I borrow your phone? And somebody loaned him the phone. But then when he was on the phone, he would start getting into a fight with his girlfriend and just keep their phone longer and longer to see how long he could keep it. And somebody almost beat him up. So he decided that that was not a good thing to do anymore. So be careful if you do something like that.
Michael, aren't you the human subjects person? Shouldn't he be dragged off in chains or something?
I'm not doing the research. See? Yeah.
Gray area there.
I've stopped all of these now. Isn't there a statute of limitations here somewhere?
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah. So talk to Michael if you have questions. Or just don't tell Michael if you don't.
Brian Poole would be a safe for that.
Talk to Brian Poole. Should I have gotten permission for those things?
You're okay.
Okay, good.
You're okay.
I'm just curious. Because, if I ever decide to do them again, it might be a good idea. So, peer learning or students teaching. These can be as small as a pair. It's called a learning dyad in the literature, by the way. Or as large as students teaching the entire class. One additional benefit, it teaches soft skills. That not only are they knowing the material, they have to learn how to manage people, manage classes, manage time, all kinds of those things that employers like these days. And students, and this was the Facebook response as well, almost all of them said they know the material better when they have to teach it. And we know this. We studied stuff in school, and then all of a sudden we're thrust into this class and we have to teach it, and we learn it really well. In fact, I mentioned this back in August. My American novel class last spring, I just experimented with left and right, not in the same way that led them into trouble. And I had them help me design the class. And I just asked them point blank, how can I help you learn the material? And one student said, well, last spring you made us teach a class. And she said, I hated that, but I knew that better than anything I've ever had to know before. So I'm like, okay. They actually taught probably 75 to 80% of that class, American novel. They complained about it on the course evaluations at the end. They thought there needed to be more of me than them, but I was thrilled with it. So it's a good idea. So this one I don't have to talk much about. One is students actually teaching something. You just give them over and you give them free range to the class. And you can do that for a 5-minute presentation, or they can teach the entire class. I'm teaching US Lit 2 this semester, and students in there will pick at least one story or one poem, and they will teach for about 20 to 30 minutes. These days, especially in our discipline, so many people are going into ed. So they need this experience, and I'm going to give it to them, and then I give them feedback on it. Debates over particular discipline-related issues. Is Hamlet insane or merely pretending? I was telling Chad on the way over here that one of his assignments was going to make an appearance. He does debates in his classes. I hear students talk about them. They love them. I did high school history debates. I signed up for every one I could because I like to hear myself talk. And it was just a fun way to engage with the material. Should the U.S. have broken away from England during the Revolutionary War? Good question. What are the arguments for and against that? Or the smaller version in pairs, explaining a concept to one another. And I hear a lot about this in math and science classes. You put a problem up on the board, you have them take some time to solve it, and then you put the correct answer and you're like, okay, now talk to each other. Like, why did you get it right? Why did you not get it right? Or even before you show the answer, talk to each other. Because a lot of times they get different answers, they can talk through and talk about why. So this helps them understand the material better and gets them to know each other. So last, PBLs. So it's called problem-based learning, case studies, games, simulations. Lots of terms are being used these days. You can develop one's own problems, or there are lots out there. Now, here's what the research says, and I'm just going to be honest about this. Knowledge is sometimes less than traditional means of instruction, but retention, application, and motivation outcomes are generally higher. So, which do we want? Do we want short-term knowledge, or do we want longer-term retention? Well, that's a good debate. Sometimes we want them to know these terms, and they need to know them like the back of their hands. Exams make perfect sense for this. but I want them to understand concepts a lot of times, so I like things like this. So what are some examples? I just like this, and they create this entire scene. A local business owner sees you in the donut shop and recognizes you as an accountant in town. Of course they do. She asks you several questions she has about the recent tax changes for your help. Okay, great. I like it because it's narrative. It's like you're going into the local Dunkin' Donuts down the street, and they're like, oh, look, it's the local accountant. Who does this? I guess here I could have done it. You go to church because they know you're an accountant at church, and they would ask you, it's like if you're a doctor, any party you go to, they're going to ask you about that rash they have on their side. So it doesn't happen to accountants as often, I would guess. Speaking of, a patient describes symptoms she has been having. What questions would you ask to determine critical information for diagnosis? There is a professor in med school now who has given up lecturing completely. All he does in his classes is walk in and say, here are my symptoms. And he gives them about a 3 to 5 minute description of the patient, and the rest of the class is them asking questions. And they have to determine what's going on. Now, of course, they have readings to prepare for this, but that's all that entire class is. No lecture at all, no exams, anything.
Isn't it Dr. House? I'm just kidding.
It may very well be. I think it's Dr. Brown. That's all I do. Is I looking like I got this rash? Anybody help? No. Take a philosophical, historical idea from a thinker and ask students to apply today. What would Henry David Thoreau think about Americans' dependence on cell phones? I'm going to throw in a caveat here. I tell my students, don't ever do this, because we're always wrong. It's the what would Jesus do problem. What would Jesus do about cell phones? Well, he'd probably be, I wouldn't really be amazed, but if we're going to humanize him a little more, he might be amazed. He's like, wow, cell phones, who knew? No, the Bible said nothing about cell phones except they're evil and satanic. So, this gets really problematic really quickly, because what we do is we actually try to impose our ideas. Like, I don't like cell phones, so Henry David Thoreau wouldn't like cell phones. But it's a fun thought experiment. You just have to be a little careful with it. So, dialogue between two important thinkers in the field, or use theories in general. So you could say, write a dialogue between an atheist and an evangelical Christian. In which case they will, rampantly stereotype the atheist and portray the evangelical Christian as brilliant and insightful. And then you mark them down for it, and you say, do better. But it's a great experiment. Or you could say, Plato and Aristotle have a fight about the nature of reality. Write the dialogue, which is fairly fitting there. And have students choose between a number of possible approaches, solutions to a particular problem, like which device would work better to solve the heart monitor question discussed in class. And have them write, here's a bunch of the problem or solutions, here's the one that would work best and why. So I like that idea a good deal. So, I brushed through a bunch of this. So now you get to do a little talking. Are we using that clock back there, buddy?
We are.
Good, because my watch is terribly different. Let's do this then. Here's what I want you to do. I like to have people leave with ideas. So I want you to think of one class that you teach, preferably in the spring, but it could be next fall, and one idea. So I want you to break into groups of 3 or 4, preferably if you could find somebody also outside of your discipline to get in there. So I see like 3 Englishy folks over there, like mingle with some people. He saw, yes, I know, he's Englishy, teaching English. And pick one of your classes and either share a non-exam assignment you already do that you think would be helpful and interesting, or one you're considering adding. So, take a few moments, do that right now. Go.
About 10 years later, 15 years later.
All right.
Music never used
If
to
I can bring you back. By the way, I will say this. I just love doing these interdisciplinary conversations. And if I can give you a little, if you're looking for a PAC goal for next year, one of the things I started doing a few years ago was visiting other people's classes. And especially if you can sit in on very different disciplines, you get all kinds of great ideas. And I got this idea just because we had somebody come for an interview and they did a sample class. and they looked wonderful on paper, and it was an atrocious class. I mean, they were just awful, terrible. We didn't hire them, by the way. And I realized at that moment how much you learn in just one 50-minute class period of watching somebody else teach, both good and bad. And so I would usually do like 2 people twice a semester, so only 4 hours or so of my life, and do one earlier in the semester and then one later to see how the class has developed. And it's just a fabulous idea. So if you have some time and want to go watch other people teach, go watch and see what you can learn. And then come in here and do a presentation about it, and you get to talk about what your peers do in really good ways. Don't tell about the bad ones. So there you go. We've got a couple moments. Does anybody want to share one that you've heard in your group? Or you can point at somebody in your group and say they should share theirs. That's what my students do. They're like, oh, don't make me do random spokespeople like I do with my freshmen.
I think what Joey mentioned as far as his application in his music business class is good if you could share that.
Tell us the idea.
All right. So I teach a course called Seminar on Entrepreneurship, and the students enrolled in the class, the cumulative final exam begins in the 7th week or 8th week after midterm. But basically, they actually have to apply in a real-life setting the content that is discussed. So I'll just give you a description of what they have to do. First, they have to select one of the school ensembles, and then they have to book that ensemble in an actual gig, paying gig outside of the school. And so it requires them to actually negotiate and select the setting, the perfect setting, negotiate with the restaurant owner or the actual performing arts center, salary, compensation, and they have to actually do the marketing aspect, do the flyers, the artwork. They have to write up the contracts. They have to do the target marketing on social media, and then they also have to communicate with the ensemble as well to make sure that they are aware of the audience that's actually going to be there, come up with the prices, just all of these aspects to put on one great show, which is just a very small aspect of music entrepreneurship. But that's the gist of it. And then what we do on the exam day is, because it's co-taught with Nathan Warner and I, we show up and we're just an audience member. And so we're just getting a vibe for the attendance, the just all these aspects, and also making sure that the band actually has content, product, and how do they actually communicate and sell the product to the audience after the performance and things like that. So, yeah.
And what I like about that is it's very clearly summing up what's important in that class, but also gives them experience they will use when they apply for jobs. It's not just, I read about this, I studied this, I took an exam on it. It's like, I've done this. I have booked a group. I have marketed that group. Something really small I do when I teach creative writing classes is at the end of the semester, they have to submit to our literary magazine, the Lee Review, and they have to submit to one non-Lee related publication, because I want them to know how you go about becoming a published writer. And occasionally, they'll get published. And this is, of course, great for them. And I'm like, yes, see, this is exactly how it works. And if they get rejected, see, this is how it works. And you just learn to deal with that, and you go on, and it's not fun, but that's the reality.
Kevin?
Yes?
I want to ask you a question. You have given us a list of a lot of engagement activities. This is wonderful. We can go to the class, we can engage the students, and we're going to be, we're going to be able to deliver the material. But we're still having difficulties. How do you do the evaluation? Especially when you have, let's say you have a class of 45 students.
Yeah.
And the school say there's a great inflation.
Yep.
Okay, so then how do we do the evaluation? Because the students can learn because they are engaged, and this is great examples of things that we can do. But then how do we do the evaluation of the separations between the A's, the B's, the C's, and the D's?
One of my fears when I first went to this was that my grades were going to go through the roof. If I get rid of exams, all of a sudden I'm going to be giving all A's. What I've actually found is I keep GPAs for all my classes for every year I've been at Lee because I'm obsessive. What I've actually found is there's been no spike at all since I gave
So
the exam.
what are you doing is you actually grading each specific activity
I am.
on a scale, let's say from 1 to 100, and the students know what they are scoring in that.
Exactly.
How do you do it, for example, on a peer, 2 or 3 students working on a presentation? Let's say, for example, you're going to present half of chapter 1, and you had 3 students. How do you separate between those 3 students who did the work?
So far, and I may be adjusting this, I have given that group 1 grade. So if they did a good job with the teaching, I send them feedback, here are my responses, here's your grade. I did have a case this semester where somebody in that group clearly wasn't doing as much work.
Yeah.
And because I had framed it, if the group got 1 grade, I gave the group 1 grade, and I felt bad about it. But what I will do in the future is tweak that and give them separate grades. Because I can usually tell one has done more preparation than the other. Sometimes they will simply tell me that. But yeah, I think giving clear rubrics, clear guidelines, clear scoring criteria in some way can help prevent this in a number of the cases. There will always be a few that we mess up on, and then the next semester we fix. But
when you come into the class at the beginning of the semester, do you already know how many type of engagement activities you're going to do?
yes.
Do the students say they're going to be 10 different projects or 10 different, and this is going to be the grade on each one?
Yep. Like I will give 5% for Moodle posts because essentially if they've done the reading, they've done a Moodle post, that's easy. Whereas the short essays, those can be worth 15 to 25% of their grade. The major papers can be worth 15 to 25% of the grade. So I still give enough of those grades where somebody simply doing the work can do well enough. But I do enough of the hard work where the student the one who couldn't pass the praxis, she's still going to make, this sounds awful to say, she's still going to make a C because that's the level of thought she typically does. So I can still negotiate that well enough. It probably also helps, I probably shouldn't admit this, I had a reputation in the department for being an easy test giver and a hard paper grader. So now, since I don't give exams, I'm just a hard paper grader. So, well, go me. I will also say in Western Lit, a 200 level class, when I switched to this, in each category I let them drop the lowest one. I'm cutting that out this semester because grades did kind of spike in that class, and I thought it was because students were just blowing off one of the assignments. Even good students are like, well, I already have an A, so I'm just not going to do that final short essay. Well, no, I'm not going to let them do that because that's learning. And a quick side note, on those short essays, like between them, I'll say for short essay 4, you have to write on 2 works that we've read, plus 1 from the previous material that you haven't written about yet. So even my short essays are cumulative. So they have to refer back to things.
So you have not given up on exams, you have just undercovered them.
Yes, and in fact, I will also say I assign almost no more writing now than I did when I gave exams because my exams had take-home essays on them. So I actually calculated the page count, and it's little more work to me than giving exams, just very little. So yeah, there are always ways of adjusting things. I mean, I'm still covering material, I'm still making sure they know things, I'm just doing it through other means. So if you want more information on this, by the way, be ready. See my PowerPoint? Watch this. Look at that. I've got color. Look at that. I brought a rainbow because that's all the colors. Okay, because I just don't need PowerPoint. Here one left. Okay, good. I borrowed 2 books from the CT because I thought they'd be helpful. They were awful. But then I pulled 3 books off my shelf that I own and that are in the CT, by the way, and these 3 books are fabulous. Mikichi's Teaching Tips covers everything in teaching with just like 3 to 4 page chapters. So like he's the one who breaks out like problem-based learning, laboratory learning. He doesn't give any good specific examples, but he gives just a brief overview and then a good bibliography to look at. So Mikichi's just a good like teaching book. Ken Bain's book, What the Best College Teachers Do, is amazing. I mean, he just finds the best college teachers and goes around to interviews and says, what do you do? His second book, What the Best College Students Do, was a waste of paper. That sounds really mean. I read it, and it was just a waste of my time. And then Engaging Ideas by John Bean. I stole all kinds of these examples from John Bean. And he also talks a lot about grading in there as well. So again, if you want this PowerPoint, email me, I'll send it to you, or just skim through the video and stop it in important places and you write things down. So thanks for coming. We're out of time and the next group needs to come in, I think.
Let-
You too? What were you asking?